Hey everybody, Andrew from Gameosity here, and today we're going to be doing a preview of Villagers, which is up on Kickstarter right now. It's hugely funded and doing great, but the question is, do we like this tableau building game about hiring different villagers to build out our village? And what do we think of it? Let's find out. In Villagers, which I have to be honest is kind of a depressingly generic name for what I think is actually a pretty neat game, you're going to be managing your village, and your village is your tableau. Over the course of the game, you're going to be drafting different villagers into your village. Each one of them is going to have a different job, and you'll create kind of this engine of productivity where, first of all, some villagers support others, opening up more profitable jobs by taking care of basics, and also you'll set up this kind of interesting chain of profit where different villagers are going to be generating income for you in slightly different amounts, and the way they key off of each other is what the game's really all about. Add to that kind of a neat but simple method of interaction between players where the villagers in my village who could support villagers for you, you can pay them, which means pay me, to have that role be supported, and you've got sort of an interesting little ecosystem of a game which is mostly solitaire-ish but has some neat moments of interactivity. Let's take a little closer look. In Villagers, wait, hold on, Kickstarter prototype, gotta do the dance.
Wee-oo, 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 wee.
Okay, so, in Villagers, you are a village founder, or at least an aspiring village founder, who has no help whatsoever in getting their village started. But there is the road down which potential villagers will come, and you can draft those villagers into your village and add them to create chains of workers that will create profit for your village. Now, profit, it's the name of the game. These coins are your victory points, but you will also spend them at times in order to unlock certain professions. You would do that so that you can create bigger gains in later turns. There are two phases to each turn. There's the drafting phase, during which you and your opponents will get villagers from the road, and then there's a placement phase where you will add them to the village and create your chains. Let's take a look. Villagers is an engine building game, tableau building game at its heart, and you'll do that by adding these villagers to your village. And each of the villagers comes in one of these suits, and each suit interacts with itself kind of uniquely. The Founder's suit, this is the grain suit. You start with this character. They will support other blue cards, and the ore, wood, and hay suits act kind of the same way. What's interesting about these three suits, black, green, and purple, is that they have sort of generic base villagers that are always available and don't have to be drafted during the drafting phase. You basically need a miner to run any sort of an ore operation, a lumberjack for any wood, or a hayer for anything that relies on hay. Then there's the grapes suit, and these are kind of standalone-ish and grow off each other. They don't have generic base cards. They need to be drafted. Then there's a suit that is the singles, and these singles don't have prerequisites really to be placed anyway. They have prerequisites to be unlocked, and I'll talk about that in a second. And they generally act as these standalone characters that aren't part of chains and don't build chains off of themselves. And then there are the special characters, and these are really interesting because each one is pretty different, and there's the most variety in these, and when they show up, they do something unique. They either give you an interesting opportunity for scoring, or they bend the rules in some sort of an interesting way. And so over the course of the draft, you'll be pulling cards in from the road and getting your hand ready for when you're going to start placing them in your village. So as I said, every village starts with the founder card, and you're kind of on your own here. But after your first draft, you'll start to add cards to your tableau in order to start building your engine. Now, you draw cards based on the amount of food icons that your village produces, and you add cards based on the number of house icons that your village has. And so in the beginning, you're only going to be able to draw 2 cards, basically 1 plus the number of icons, and you're only going to be able to place 2 villagers, 2 plus the number of house icons, of which you start with none. But let's just look at how some of these cards get added to your village. Well, first of all, let's say I wanted to add a blacksmith. This character is pretty cool. He's going to produce me 2 coins every time there's a scoring round during the course of the game, and the issue with the blacksmith is that he has a prerequisite. This blacksmith requires a miner in order to be added to my village. So at some point during my turn, before I could add the blacksmith, I would grab one of the generic miner cards. These are one of the base cards. They're always available. And you need to discard one of the cards you drafted in order to take one of the base characters. And so the miner can support up to 2 other characters. So once the miner was in my village, I could take this blacksmith and add him just like that. Now, there are all sorts of chains that can be built. So like the blacksmith can support eventually jewelers, you've got spelunkers, that's the ore suit's whole tech tree basically as they get to more and more profitable characters. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that some cards have prerequisites that aren't in their suit. So for example, the Cooper here. The Cooper is another very profitable card, 4 points, that's great. However, it might be a tiny bit hard to see. I think Jeff's going to do some scanning magic, but there's a lock icon in the corner here, and the word blacksmith right there, which means that before you can have a Cooper, you need access to a blacksmith. Now, in my village, that works out. I would need a lumberjack to support this character, because the Cooper is from the wood suit, and so would need a lumberjack as a base. However, what happens if I don't have that blacksmith? Well, if my opponents do, I have an opportunity to use their blacksmith by way of paying them. You shell out some coins, and coins are your victory points, so it's sort of a calculated risk, and you'll either shell them out to your opponent. If they've got one, there's a way you can pay the bank in order to unlock a character as you place them in, and that sort of interactivity will let you take advantage of other characters that your other players are putting in. And moreover, if you've got the blacksmith who's already in your village, you're going to be able to actually turn a slight profit, because other players are likely going to need to pay you to gain access to that role to build out their trees. Once a character is in your village, it's there to stay, and on subsequent turns, you will either be able to build off of it, use it as a prerequisite, use it to unlock other characters, or during the 2 scoring rounds, and on the second round and on the last round of the game, you'll be able to use them to turn a profit. The fun here is in the growth. Basically, every villager that you add expands your engine in some way. Maybe you're going to be adding icons like for food that will let you draw more cards during the draft, and not only do cards drawn let you give you more options with regard to what you're adding to your village, but they also, as I said, kind of serve as this current throwaway currency that you're going to need to use to get your basic villagers in place. Maybe you're going to be adding house icons that are going to make it so that on later turns you've got big plays. Every house icon adds another opportunity to add a character to your village, and so that can make a huge difference when you grab up a whole bunch of really valuable characters. You want to be able to add them to your village in time for them to actually do something. You might, of course, be adding cards that will score themselves, so cards that generate a profit, but then there are cards that interact with each other in kind of interesting ways, like the log rafter, who's going to score you a point based on the number of other green cards that you have in your tableau. And so as you gather up these villagers, this sort of emergent strategy starts to take shape, and it'll be like, oh, I got an early draft of a Graper, so I'm going to go down a path that if I hadn't gotten that pull early in the game, maybe I'm not going to bother with. Or, wow, I've got a miner, a seeker, and a spelunker. That's almost all the way to one of the most profitable cards in the game, the jeweler. Is it worth me dedicating myself down that road to try and make sure that I get that, or should I diversify? It's a lot of simple strategic choices that feel very satisfying, because with every card that you add, something new is kind of opening up for you, but it's also opening up for your opponent, and that's a really interesting dynamic. Add to that these single cards, these solitary characters that just sort of form their own economy, and those special characters that will give you all sorts of interesting little opportunities to change the way the game works. And there's actually a lot going on here in what is otherwise an easy to learn and kind of easy to grasp game. And we think that's really cool. And that's Villagers. We really enjoyed this one. The fact is that at 2 players, which is how we mostly tried it, it is a pretty fun game. The interactivity is just high enough that you're involved in what other people are doing, and you're kind of keeping an eye on what other people are interested in. But what's interesting, though, is if you've got more than the 2, if you've got more players, you have more opportunities to unlock each other's characters, which sets up a really cool table dynamic. It's not a game that's all about like high stress strategy of keeping track of what every other player is doing, but it's not solitaire, which the 2-player game can feel a little bit more solitaire, which we had no problem with. We enjoy the slightly more solitary games. What we liked most about it was the feeling of building something. You get your villagers, you plan how you're going to add them to your village, you build your engine for points, and that's really satisfying. When the scoring rounds come in and your engine goes off and you get a bunch of points, and this villager supports that villager, and it all trickles in, and you rake in a big pile of cash, that's a super, super satisfying feeling. And if you end up with the biggest point pile, fantastic. And if not, then you can at least look down and kind of look at your village and say, these are my villagers, and it's what you've built. And so in that way, it's a satisfying game. We liked it at 2, as I said. More players add a little more dynamic action at the table. But overall, we've enjoyed the villagers at every player count. It's up on Kickstarter right now. It's got a ways to go in its run, but it has crushed its funding goal, and it's well into stretch goals at this point. They've added a bunch of new special roles, the special villagers that all do unique things, and so those create these sort of like pops of activity during the game that highlight the moments when your engine goes off and they trigger. And overall, we really, really had a good time with it. And we totally think you should go to their Kickstarter and check it out. We can't wait to see what the finished one's going to look like, because we've had a blast playing this one. Thanks for watching. I'm Andrew from Gameosity. We'll see you next game. Thanks for watching our preview. If you'd like to see more of our full-length reviews, go ahead and click over here. If you'd like to see a few of our Game in a Minutes, click over here. And if you can save me from the giant hands, please do so by clicking on me right now. Please.